The last mile back to the truck always feels the longest. The light is dropping fast, the wind has found the gap under your collar, and your fingers stopped taking orders about an hour ago. 39 degrees, and a misting rain. The kind of evening nobody ever wrote a song about. Then your buddy holds out the flask. One swallow, and a wave of honest-feeling heat rolls up out of your chest and spreads clear to your ears. Somebody says the old line, that it warms a man from the inside out, and everybody nods, because everybody can feel it working. Here is the trouble with that nod. The warm feeling is real. The warming is a lie, and it is the oldest lie in the North American woods. The record keepers can prove that this one piece of camp wisdom has put more men in the ground than every wolf this continent ever raised. By the end of tonight, you will be able to prove it too. Walter, if you want the name my mother used. Walt is what 400 boys settled on, across 35 years of running a scout troop in the North Woods of Michigan. In all those years, through every November campout and every storm that arrived uninvited, I never lost a boy, not one. Part of that is luck, and I will not pretend otherwise. But part of it is that the old scoutmasters who trained me were quietly at war with tonight's myth, and they made sure I enlisted too. So here is what you get before we bank the fire. You will see exactly what that swallow does inside your body, in plain plumbing terms, because once you have seen the machinery, the myth can never fool you again. You will get the real numbers, wolves in one column, cold in the other, and the gap is wider than you think. And you will leave with 4 old scout rules that actually keep a man warm, plus the 4 little warning signs that tell you when somebody at your camp is sliding into real trouble. But first you need to know where the lie was born, because it did not start around a campfire. It started in a doctor's office. Go back 150 years, and alcohol was not a vice in the medical books. It was medicine, prescribed in writing by serious men with serious degrees. Doctors in the 1800s ordered brandy and whiskey as a stimulant. For weak hearts, for fevers, for shock, and for exposure to cold. A traveler pulled half-frozen out of a river got brandy spooned into him as standard care from the best-trained physicians of the age. The explorers of that era packed it the same way. The expedition accounts from the early Antarctic voyages mention medicinal brandy again and again, packed right in with the medical stores, and the official register of accepted medicines in this country kept whiskey and brandy on its pages until 1916. Even during Prohibition, a man could walk out of a drugstore with prescription whiskey signed by his physician. So understand something about your great-grandfather. He did not invent the idea that liquor fights cold. A man with a diploma handed it to him, and the man with the diploma believed it. Then a painting made the idea famous. In 1820, a young English painter named Edwin Landseer showed 2 big rescue dogs finding a traveler in the alpine snow, and around one dog's neck he painted a tidy little barrel of brandy. The monks, who actually ran those rescue dogs through the mountain passes, never sent liquor out on a dog's collar. The barrel was a decoration, dreamed up in an art studio an ocean away from the snow. But prints of that picture traveled the world, and the idea traveled with them. A dying man in the drifts, saved by a drink. The little barrel has been strapped to the myth ever since, and you can still buy a St. Bernard figurine wearing one today. Now put that idea in the coat pocket of a working man. The logging camps that cut the white pine out of Michigan and Wisconsin, the same woods I taught in for 35 years, ran on hard rules, and one rule shows up in the old camp histories over and over: no liquor in camp. The companies had a business reason. Sober men cut straight and argue less, so the drinking waited for town. Payday emptied the camps into the saloon streets, and the old shanty boy songs are honest about what happened there. Whiskey runs through those verses like a river through a valley, and between the saloon and the bunkhouse lay the cold miles. Picture a man with a belly full of that warm feeling, walking a winter road at midnight, believing with his whole body that the drink is holding the cold off him. The stories that came down from that generation are quiet ones. The fellow who sat down against a stump to rest his legs and never stood back up. The old-timers I learned from carried those stories, and it taught them to treat a flask with respect and suspicion at the same time. My own father, a carpenter who hunted every November of his life, kept a bottle in the kitchen cabinet, and I can still hear his rule about it. That is for when the boots are off and the door is shut, and not 1 minute before. Rue. It took me years to understand that his rule was not manners. It was survival knowledge, worn smooth by repetition, from men who had seen the other way end badly. So what does the swallow actually do? Walk through the machinery with me, because it is simpler than you would guess, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Your body in the cold runs like a house in winter. The furnace sits in the middle, your heart, your liver, the deep organs, and the body's first move in cold weather is to protect that middle at any cost. It does that by narrowing the small blood vessels out at the skin. Less warm blood near the surface means less heat bleeding away into the weather. Your hide goes a little pale and a little cool, and that is not a malfunction. That is the house closing its storm windows. Alcohol throws the storm windows open. It relaxes those narrowed vessels, and warm blood comes flooding back to the surface, into your cheeks, your chest, your ears, and here is the cruel part of the design. The nerves that report warm and cold to your brain sit out in your skin, not deep in your chest. You feel weather where weather arrives, at the surface. So when that warm blood rushes outward, the only sensors you own get a face full of heat and wire the good news straight upstairs. It feels like heat arriving. It is heat leaving. That flush in your cheeks is your furnace being pumped out into the yard, while every nerve you trust reports it is springtime. Nature never built a better lie. And the swallow is not done with you. When your core cools, the body fires up its emergency heater, shivering, muscle work that makes real heat on demand. Drink dampens that response, so the one machine that could be saving you gets told to sit down. The thermostat takes a hit as well. The brain's little temperature office, the control room that decides when to shiver and when to slam the vessel shut, runs slower and sloppier with alcohol in the blood. Then comes the part every man who ever drank already knows. The swallow softens judgment. The gloves come off because your hands feel fine. The last mile can wait a while because the log you are sitting on feels almost cozy. Add it up. Cold and alcohol is not one problem stacked on another. It is a key cut to fit every single lock your body uses to defend itself. Now the arithmetic, because I promised you numbers, and this is where the title of tonight's video stops sounding like campfire talk. Every boy who ever walked into the North Woods was raised to fear the wolf, the howl after dark, the eyes at the edge of the firelight, the stories passed down like heirlooms. Fair enough. Wolves are serious animals, and you give them room. But here is the record. Across the entire 20th century, in all of North America, there is not one documented case of a healthy wild wolf killing a human being. 100 years, a continent full of wolves, loggers, trappers, and hunters, and the confirmed count for that whole century is 0. In this century so far, the record keepers list 2. One man in northern Canada in 2005, one woman in Alaska in 2010. And even if you widen the books to take in every kind of case ever written down, sick animals and cornered animals included, the whole North American ledger, since anybody kept records, runs to a few dozen deaths. That is the entire column for the animal we built the Campfire stories around. Now the other column. The federal disease trackers counted the deaths from natural cold in this country. and across one 13-year stretch they measured, it averaged about 1,300 Americans every single year. Not in a terrible winter, in an average one. And when the medical examiners look closer at those cold deaths, one thing keeps surfacing in the bloodwork: drink. A big international review that pooled the studies puts alcohol as a contributing factor in roughly 3 out of every 10 deaths from cold. And one study out of northern Sweden examined 51 people who had died of exposure and found that about 2 out of 3 of them had been drinking. So run the sums the old way, on your fingers. Every wolf on this continent, across all of recorded history, cannot match what the cold takes in one quiet year. And in somewhere between 1/3 and 2/3 of those cold deaths, the warm little lie was right there in the bloodstream, helping. That is the claim in tonight's title, Paid in Full. The myth that a drink keeps the cold off has killed more woodsmen than wolves ever did. It is not close, and it never was. If this channel earns its keep anywhere, it is right here. Old sayings with the arithmetic finally done on them. If that belongs in your week, hit subscribe, and I will keep doing the counting. And stay with me now, because the next number is the one I most need you to carry home. It is not about the weather you avoid, it is about the weather you camp in. Ask 10 campers what kind of weather kills, and they will describe 20 below and a screaming wind, weather they would never go out in anyway. The Government Weather Service and the Forest Service keep repeating a different fact, and it deserves the repetition. Most hypothermia cases happen in air temperatures between 30 and 50 degrees. Sit with that range a moment. 30 to 50 is a damp October deer camp. 30 to 50 is a spring fishing trip. 30 to 50 is the exact evening I described at the top of this video. 39 degrees and misting. The recipe is never just the thermometer. It is cool air, plus wet, plus a little wind. And the wet does not have to be a creek you fell into. Here is how it usually goes. A man climbs a ridge in the afternoon with his jacket zipped, works up a good sweat, and thinks nothing of it. Then he stops to glass the valley, the sweat starts drying, the breeze finds it, and his soaked shirt turns into a refrigeration system he is wearing against his own skin. Sweat is winter rain you make yourself. The doctors put the danger line at about 95 degrees of core temperature. Below that, the word is hypothermia, and the machinery starts failing in exactly the order we just walked through. So here is the old scout answer. 4 rules, and not one of them cost $40. Rule 1. Dress like an onion, and leave the cotton home. 3. Loose layers beat one thick coat, because the warmth is not really in the fabric. It is in the quiet pockets of air trapped between the layers, and 3 layers hold more air than one. Something snug against the skin that moves sweat off you. Wool, or a good fleece in the middle to hold your heat. A shell over the top to stop wind and rain. Cotton is the camp chair fabric. Fine and comfortable by the fire on a dry evening, but wet cotton clings cold against your skin and pulls your heat out. So on the trail, on the water, on any day the sky looks undecided, it stays in the truck. Top it with a warm hat, because bare skin sheds heat anywhere it is exposed. And unzip before you climb, not after. Venting early keeps the sweat from ever soaking in, and a dry man is a warm man in a way no gadget can arrange. Last piece of Rule 1. A full change of dry clothes rides in a bag that cannot leak, and the man who goes into the creek changes right there on the bank, not back at the trailhead. Rule 2. Feed the furnace. Your body makes heat out of food the way a stove makes it out of wood, and you cannot burn what you never loaded. Eat a real meal before the cold hours, and keep something in your pocket to gnaw on through the day. Nuts, jerky, a candy bar, it does not have to be fancy. Then carry the drink that actually does what the flask only promises, a thermos, filled hot and sweet before you leave. Cocoa or sweet tea does the job best, and the sugar in it is Firewood your shivering muscles can actually burn. Warm liquid delivers its comfort to the middle of you, right where the furnace lives, instead of throwing your own heat out through your skin. The thermos is the honest flask. Same ritual, same pass-it-around fellowship at the tailgate, and every promise it makes, it keeps. Rule 3. Get off the ground and out of the wind. Cold ground steals heat from a sitting man faster than cold air does, so what is under you matters more than what is over you. Sleeping out, that means a proper pad or a thick folded blanket under the bag, every time. Sitting out, that means a log, a foam square, a folded coat, anything but bare dirt and stone. Wind is the other thief. Moving air strips away the thin blanket of warmth your body keeps next to your skin, which is why a breezy 40 feels meaner than a still 30. 10 minutes spent moving camp behind a ridge, into a thicket, or under a stone ledge buys you more warmth than anything sold in a catalog. The old-timers picked their campsites for wind first and view second, and they were right. Those 3 rules, and the 4th one still coming, are the spine of the cold weather chapter in my book, The Old Scout Way, Walt's Camping Manual. 60 of the old tricks with the complete $50 kit beside them, $29, lifetime updates. You will find the link in the description below. Now Rule 4, and I saved it for last on purpose. Watch each other, because Rule 4 is the one that catches trouble after the first 3 have already slipped. Cold does its first damage to the brain, quietly, which means a chilled man is the last person in camp to know he is in trouble, and the first person to argue about it. The old first aid teachers built a memory hook for the warning signs, and it is a good one. The umbles, he mumbles. His speech goes slow and thick, like a man talking in his sleep. He stumbles. He trips over roots he would normally step past without looking down. He fumbles. He drops the flashlight, loses a fight with a zipper, makes a mess of a knot he has tied 1,000 times, and he grumbles. Short-tempered or strangely flat, apathetic about supper, about the fire, about things he ought to care about. I watched for the umbles on every cold weather trip I ever led, the way a sailor watches the sky. A boy who got quiet and clumsy at the same time, got warmed up first and asked questions later. Any 2 umbles together on a cold, wet day, and you treat it as the real thing. No voting. Here is the drill, and it is simple on purpose. Get him out of the wind and the wet, into a tent, a truck cab, under a tarp. Wet clothes off, dry layers on, and wrap him in whatever insulation you have, with a good thick layer underneath him too, because the ground keeps robbing him while you work. If he is fully awake and swallowing fine, small sips of something warm and sweet, nothing with alcohol in it, and skip the coffee as well. Warm the middle of him, not the hands and feet first, and be gentle about all of it. No rubbing, and if he is confused, if he keeps sliding, if the shivering will not quit or has strangely stopped, that is a medical emergency, full stop. You call for help, and you keep him warm and still until it arrives. A man deep in the cold is a hospital's job, and the old scoutmasters never pretended otherwise, which brings me to the one mistake I want buried for good tonight. When a man is shaking cold, somebody at every fire I ever sat around has wanted to hand him the flask, out of pure kindness, every time. Now you know what that kindness actually does. It throws his storm windows open, quiets the shivering that was fighting for him, and dresses the robbery up as a rescue. The Red Cross first aid people put it in one flat sentence: never give alcohol to a person suffering from the cold. Hot sweet liquid, dry wool, and help on the way. That is what mercy looks like. I will tell you the darkest piece of this whole subject, because it settles the argument better than any statistic. In the last stage of deep cold, the worn-out vessels at the skin finally give up and fall open, and one final flood of warm blood hits the surface. The freezing man suddenly feels like he is burning up. Searchers sometimes find victims with their coats off, folded on the snow beside them. The medical journals report that this final false heat shows up in something like a fifth to half of fatal cases. Think about what that means. The body's own last failure produces the exact same counterfeit warmth the flask sells by the swallow. One is a tragedy at the end of a bad night. The other, men have been pouring on purpose for 200 years and calling it a remedy. Now the honest stretch, because I am not your preacher, and this is not a temperance lecture. If the tents are up, the fire is fed, supper is done, and nobody has anywhere left to be tonight, then a drink at the fire is between you and your own good sense. That is the porch use of the bottle, and the porch use is as old as porches. Two cautions right along even there. First, the drink holds your storm windows open while you sleep, so a cold night in a tent gets harder with a nightcap in you, not easier. Give the bag a fighting chance on the frosty trips. Second, an older body, and I say this as the owner of one, makes less heat than it used to, and notices cold later than it should. The health agencies rank folks past 65 at the highest risk in cold weather, and the death counts bear them out. The margin you had at 30 is not the margin you have now, and pretending otherwise is how proud men get hurt. So the rule I taught grown men on winter trips was never no drink, ever. It was 4 nevers. Never as a warm-up plan, never before the walk out, the drive home, or the boat ride in, never for somebody already cold and shaking, and never packed as safety equipment. The bottle celebrates at the end of the story. It does not get to be a character in the middle of it. Which leaves the last question worth asking tonight. If the science has been settled for a lifetime, why is this myth still standing at every deer camp and boat launch in America? Because it hired the best sales force a lie ever had, your own nervous system. Every other piece of bad outdoor advice needs a book or a video to spread it. This one proves itself again with every swallow, in the sworn testimony of your own warm cheeks, because it flatters us. A man who can fight cold with a flask does not need the hat, the wool, the thermos, the fussing. The myth whispers that toughness can stand in for heat, and the cold has never once accepted that trade, because it wears a friendly disguise in the off-season. The hot toddy for a winter chest cold, the nip in the cocoa at the football game, the brandy snifter by the fireplace in every Christmas movie ever filmed. The idea gets replanted every single winter, softly, in warm, safe rooms where it does no harm at all. And because nobody makes a nickel correcting it, there is no gadget to sell in its place, no shelf for it at the store. The correction is wool socks, a candy bar, and a thermos refill, and there is no marketing budget behind any of those. The gear industry will happily spend millions teaching you that warmth costs $400 a tent. It will never spend a dime reminding you that the most dangerous thing at deer camp rides in a coat pocket. So that job falls to old men like me, and I accept it gladly. Let us fold the whole lesson down small enough to carry out of here. Warm is a feeling, and a feeling can be bought for the price of a swallow. Heat is a fact, and the facts live in wool, in calories, in dry clothes, in a full thermos, in a pad under your bones. The woods have always been kindest to the men who kept those two words separate. One small job this week. Dig the thermos out of the cupboard, run it full of something hot and sweet on Saturday morning, and let it ride where the flask used to. Same ritual, same fellowship at the tailgate, and it tells the truth. And I want the stories tonight. Who handed you your first one for the cold? A father, an uncle, a deer camp full of grown men who all believed it. What year did you learn better, and what taught you? Put it in a comment, because half of what I know arrived exactly that way, from men who lived it first. Next time somebody at the fire tells wolf stories, let them finish. Good stories are worth the firewood. But when the flask starts its rounds, remember the arithmetic of a whole century. The wolves, for all their teeth and all their press, took 2. The warm little lie took more men than anybody ever carved a warning sign for. You were raised to watch the tree line, watch the coat pocket instead.